Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a very specific corner of the global economy,
Uh-huh.
the market for Matrine. Now, if you're wondering what Matrine is, it's a compound derives naturally from certain plants.
Right, from the Sephora genus, typically.
Exactly. And as it turns out, there's a significant market built around its diverse uses.
That's right. And our source material for this deep dive is a pretty comprehensive market research report. It gives us the hard data, sales revenue figures, regional growth
The
trends.
forecast, too.
Yeah, and forecasts stretching out all the way to 2033. It's basically the roadmap for where this market has been and where it's projected to go.
So our mission today is, well, to take this report, cut through all the raw data,
Yeah, get to the core of it.
and pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge for you. Think of it as your shortcut to being really well informed about the specific Matrine market.
Okay.
Let's start with the big picture then, the global numbers from the report. What are we looking at?
Absolutely. So the report puts the global Matrine market value at $46.6 million. That was back in 2021.
46.6 million, okay.
Looking ahead, just to 2025, it expects that number to climb a bit to $52.3 million.
Okay, so decent initial growth there. What about the longer-term forecast, like out to 2033?
Right, so by 2033, the forecast projects the market reaching approximately $65.7 million.
65.7.
Yeah. Which, if you look at the growth rate over that whole period, 2021 to 2033, it translates to a projected global compound annual growth rate, the CAGR of about 2.9%.
2.9%. So a picture of steady, kind of consistent expansion then.
That's exactly it. Steady, consistent growth.
Okay, steady growth is interesting. The report, it highlights why this growth is happening, right?
Yeah.
What are the main drivers here?
It does. It points primarily to the expanding applications of Matrine. So we're seeing increased use in pharmaceuticals.
Right. I've heard about potential anti-cancer uses.
Yeah, potential anti-cancer, antiviral properties are being explored. Then agriculture is another big driver.
Ah, like as a pesticide.
Exactly, particularly as a more natural biopesticide that's gaining traction. And then there are various applications in the industrial sector as well.
Right.
So that diversification, as the report really notes, is a key factor in market stability and, its projected growth. It's not just relying on one single sector.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The diverse uses create a broader demand base. Let's get granular now and see where this growth is actually happening geographically.
Good idea.
Diving into the regional breakdown, North America. That's
Oh.
a significant piece of the puzzle, yeah. What did the report find there?
Yeah, North America represented $12.2 million in market revenue back in 2021.
12.2 million.
And the forecast predicts a rise to $13.5 million by 2025
Okay.
and reaching $16.5 million by 2033.
16.5. And the regional CAGR for North America?
That's projected at 2.5%.
Okay, so just slightly slower than that global average of 2.9%, but still, solid growth.
Solid growth, yeah.
Are the trends pretty uniform across North America? Or do we see, like, variations country by country?
Oh, there are definitely variations. And this is where the report offered some, well, pretty fascinating detail. The United States, it's the largest market in the region, no surprise there.
Right.
Starting at $9.2 million in 2021 and expected to reach about $12 million by 2033.
Okay.
It has a steady CAGR of 2.2%. So it's the biggest piece, definitely, but actually not the fastest growing.
Interesting. So who is setting the pace in North America then?
Well, that would be Mexico, according to data.
Mexico. Okay.
Yeah, it started from a smaller base, obviously just $1.2 million in 2021, but it's projected to reach $1.8 million by 2033,
Uh-huh.
and its CAGR is 3.6%. The report specifically highlights that as the highest in the North American region.
3.6%.
Wow.
And Canada.
Canada's also showing stronger relative growth than the U.S.
Mhm.
It goes from $1.8 million up to $2.7 million with a 3.3% CAGR.
That's a really great nugget. Mexico leading North American growth. Does the report offer any clues as to why? Why Mexico might be growing faster?
Wow.
Is it tied to specific applications, maybe agriculture, like you mentioned, biopesticides?
The report doesn't dive super deep into the micro drivers for each country, you
Yeah.
know, but yeah, that higher growth in Mexico and Canada, it certainly suggests there might be specific regulatory support.
Right.
Or maybe increasing adoption of Matrine in their key industries, perhaps agriculture, like you said, or maybe localized health demand factors that are just moving a bit faster than in the larger, sort of more established U.S. market.
Okay.
But it's definitely where the relative momentum is, according to these numbers.
Got it. Okay, let's move across the Atlantic then to Europe. What kind of picture does the report paint for that region?
So Europe's total market was $8.6 million in 2021,
8.6.
climbing to $11.7 million by 2033. Its regional CAGR is 2.7%, so right around that global average.
2.7.
Okay.
Any standout countries in Europe? The UK often has, unique trends.
The UK actually does stand out here. It's got the region's highest projected growth rate.
Really?
Yeah. Starting small, $0.7 million in 2021, but it's forecasted to reach $1 million by 2033. That gives it a strong 3.8% CAGR.
3.8%. Interesting. And Germany, usually a big player.
Germany's the largest market in Europe, yeah. It was worth $1.6 million in 2021, projected to reach $2.3 million by 2033. That's a solid 3.2% CAGR.
So Germany's bigger, but UK growing faster. What about some of the other major European economies? France, Italy?
Right. Countries like France and Italy, they show a somewhat slower pace, at least compared to the UK or Germany. France moves from $1.2 million to $1.5 million by 2033. That's a 2.3% CAGR.
Yeah.
Italy follows a pretty similar path, $0.8 million up to $1 million, with a 2.4% CAGR.
And Russia?
Russia is noted as having an even slower CAGR, actually, just 1.9%, reaching $1.8 million by 2033 from $1.4 million back in 2021.
Okay. And the smaller markets mentioned?
Yes, Spain shows steady growth, expected to hit $1 million by 2033 from $0.8 million. Luxembourg, though obviously a much smaller market, starting at just $0.1 million.
Tiny.
It shows robust growth to $0.2 million by 2025 and kind of holds there through 2033. That gives it a 3% CAGR across the whole period.
Still pretty good growth for a school base.
Exactly. And the rest of Europe, lumped together, also shows decent growth, around a 3.5% CAGR.
So it sounds like Europe is really a mix of different growth speeds, but overall contributing steadily. Does the report connect these variations to things like, say, regulation? Europe's known for strict environmental rules, right? That could impact biopesticide use.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Europe's known for strict environmental rules, right? That could impact biopesticide use.
That's a great point. And yes, the report does mention regulatory environments as a key influencing factor globally. So in Europe, yeah, evolving regulations around traditional pesticides could certainly be influencing the adoption rate of natural alternatives like Matrine,
Makes sense.
especially in agriculture. And that could potentially explain some of the varying growth rates we see across different member states, maybe depending on local implementation or, national focus.
Okay, right. Let's shift our focus now to the region that the report really highlights as, well, the engine of global growth, Asia Pacific.
Absolutely. Asia Pacific, or APAC, is the largest market globally for Matrine. It was valued at a pretty substantial $20.3 million back in 2021.
20.3 million. Wow, that's almost half the global total right there.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's projected to see significant expansion, growing to $30.5 million by 2033, with a strong regional CAGR of 3.3%, so faster than the global average.
3.3%. And which countries are really fueling this growth in APAC?
Well, China is the largest contributor within APAC. Started at $9.6 million in 2021.
A big chunk.
Forecasted to reach $14.9 million by 2033. That's a strong 3.6% CAGR.
3.6.
But the country with one of the highest growth rates globally, as the report really points out, is India.
India. Okay, what's the story there?
India shows really remarkable growth potential. It goes from $3.1 million in 2021 to a projected $5.2 million by 2033.
Okay.
Boasting a notable 4.3% CAGR.
4.3%. Wow, that's a significant jump compared to the global average, even compared to China.
It really is. It suggests particularly strong drivers are at play in the India market.
Does the report shed any light on why India's growth is projected to be so high? Is it like rapid adoption in a specific sector? Pharma, maybe? Or agriculture, given population size or policy shifts?
Again, the report focuses on the broader trend of expanding applications being key drivers globally, but it's, reasonable to infer that in a large and rapidly developing economy like India, the uptake of Matrine in those specific sectors, maybe pharmaceuticals, given its huge population, or perhaps agriculture, where innovation and adoption of things like biopesticides might be accelerating. It's just happening at a much faster pace than in some of the more mature markets.
Makes sense. What about other APAC countries?
South Korea also shows solid growth, from $1.2 million up to $1.8 million. That's a 3.1% CAGR.
Okay.
Australia is looking at a steady 2.9% CAGR. growing from $1.6 million to $2.2 million by 2033.
Yeah.
And Southeast Asia sort of collectively shows consistent growth potential too. Moving from $0.8 million in 2021 to $1.2 million in 2033, that's a 3.4% CAGR.
Okay.
So APAC isn't just large, it's clearly where a lot of the global market momentum is coming from, really driven by specific countries like China and especially India.
Yeah, that really clarifies why APAC is so crucial.
Yeah.
Let's quickly touch on Latin America and the Middle East markets mentioned in the report. What's the main takeaway there?
The report highlights that emerging markets in Latin America are showing strong potential. For
Okay.
example, Brazil is projected to grow from $1.4 million in 2021 to $1.9 million in 2033. That's a 3.1% CAGR.
Pretty solid.
Yeah. And Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Chile, they also show steady growth trajectories, generally in the, 2-3% CAGR range. It points to increasing adoption as these economies develop and potentially integrate Matrine more into their local industries, maybe agriculture again.
Right. And the Middle East and Africa. What's the outlook there?
This region appears to have a more mixed outlook, according to the report. Egypt and Turkey, they show modest growth, moving from about 0.1 million to 0.2 million between 2021 and 2033.
So,
Their CAGR are around 2.3%.
right.
However, the rest of Middle East category shows a much flatter curve. It's holding pretty steady at just $0.5 million across the entire period.
Really? Flat?
Yeah, with a very low CGR of just 1.3%, which suggests, slower or maybe less widespread adoption in some parts of that region compared to others.
Interesting. Okay, so pulling all this regional data together then,
Huh.
we've got North America with steady growth, but Mexico and Canada showing some real momentum.
Mm-hmm.
Europe with varying paces but contributing overall. APAC is the major engine, really driven by China and especially India. And Latin America is showing emerging potential, while the Middle East is a bit more mixed.
That sums it up well.
It really does reinforce that global picture of a steady sort of upward trajectory, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The overall trend reported is consistent, moderate growth. And while the speed, as we saw, varies significantly region to region, even country to country,
Yeah.
driven by local factors, regulatory stuff, and the specific applications taking hold, the aggregate effect is that stable expansion. It's driven by Matrine's utility in these diverse sectors, pharma, agriculture, industry.
Right. So to sort of wrap up this deep dive into the Matrine market report, the core takeaway seems pretty clear. The global market is on a steady, fairly predictable growth path through 2033.
Exactly. And that growth, as we've discussed, is primarily fueled by the expanding uses of Matrine, particularly in pharmaceuticals, its role as a biopesticide in agriculture, and various industrial applications.
And we've seen how this plays out differently depending on where you look geographically. Asia-Pacific is dominant. It's a key growth driver, highlighted by countries like India with that particularly high projected growth, while North America and Europe offer steady contributions. And Latin America shows that promising potential in its emerging markets.
And the report also reminds us, importantly, that influencing factors like those regional regulatory environments,
Yeah.
and specific localized demand for Matrine's applications, those will continue to shape market positioning and the actual growth rates across these different areas.
Okay, so here's a thought for you to consider, just building on everything we've unpacked from this report.
Yeah.
Given these varied regional growth rates we saw, and the report's emphasis on regulation and local demand, how might entirely new innovations in Matrine's applications, maybe uses we haven't even really thought about yet or aren't widespread, how might those specifically interact with these existing regional dynamics? Could they potentially accelerate or, I don't know, alter the market landscape, even beyond this currently projected steady growth?
That's a fascinating question. Because, new applications could completely unlock demand in unforeseen ways, especially in regions where maybe the regulatory environment or specific local needs are sort of uniquely aligned to accept those innovations faster. It could definitely shake things up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Something to keep an eye on for sure. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the global Matrine market.
Okay, let's get into this. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources you send us, like the market research you shared for this one, and we really dig in.
Yeah, try and find out what's really going on.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into the world of Matrine.
Right, and I think our mission here, for this dive anyway, is to kind of unpack the key trends. What's driving things? What are the roadblocks shaping this market? Because it's evolving.
It really is.
And it's this fascinating spot, isn't it? right? Where
Okay.
ancient tradition meets modern science.
Absolutely. That's what caught my eye. Matrine's got this really deep history, but the ways it might be used now feel super current. Covers quite a few big industries.
Hmm.
So let's jump in. According to the research you sent, what's really fueling the interest in Matrine right now?
Well, probably one of the biggest things is this rising demand globally for plant-based ingredients.
Okay, plant-based.
Yeah, and especially ones that have roots in traditional Chinese medicine, TCM.
Ah, right, because Matrine comes from Sephora flavescens. That's a herb they've used for ages in TCM, isn't it?
Exactly, centuries. So you've got consumers, industries, everyone kind of looking for natural alternatives, trying to move away from synthetic chemicals.
Makes sense.
And Matrine, while it's botanical origin, plus that long history, that gives it a real leg up. The sources definitely position it strongly in pharma and nutraceuticals.
And it's not just staying in Asia.
No, that's key. The interest is really growing, expanding into Western markets too.
Okay, so where specifically in like the medical field is it getting looked at? The research mentioned some pretty promising lab results, preclinical stuff.
It did, yeah. Those studies point towards a whole range of potential properties.
Yeah.
Things like anti-tumor, anti-inflammatory, even antiviral activity.
Wow, that's broad.
It is. What's interesting is just how many different areas it could potentially apply to.
So like what specific conditions are getting the most attention?
The sources flag things like cancer treatments as an area of interest. Also liver protection, which is interesting. We might circle back to that later.
Okay.
And even some exploration, believe it or not, as an adjunct therapy for things like COVID-19.
Really?
Yeah. So that kind of, therapeutic versatility suggests Matrine could be a contender, maybe a key compound in the next.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Matrine could be a contender, maybe a key compound in the next generation of natural bioactive drugs.
Okay, but it's not just about human health, right? I think the research mentioned agriculture too.
It did, yeah, and that's another significant driver. Matrine is really gaining traction as a botanical insecticide.
A botanical one. Why is that appealing now? What's the draw?
Well, it really ties into that whole shift towards environmental awareness, sustainability.
Right, less harsh chemicals.
Exactly. It's low toxicity, relatively speaking, to humans, but it's still effective against pests. That makes it a good candidate for being a biopesticide.
Especially for organic farming, I guess.
Definitely. That's a big area of appeal. And with governments bringing in stricter rules about synthetic agrochemicals, things like Matrine are looking more and more like, good eco-friendly alternatives.
Okay, so we've got this compound, ancient roots, but finding all these modern uses in medicine, in farming, all driven by this global push for natural solutions. Sounds pretty positive, but the research also points out it's not quite that simple, is it? There are definitely some challenges.
Oh, yeah, absolutely not simple. Yeah, despite that long history of traditional use and all those promising lab results we mentioned, a major restraint is, limited clinical validation. And the regulatory approvals that follow from that, or don't follow, in many key markets.
So even though it's been used for centuries traditionally, getting that modern scientific stamp of approval, that's still a big hurdle.
Precisely. The sources are pretty clear. There's a real lack of large-scale human clinical trials needed to actually back up many of the health claims.
And without that,
It's a huge barrier to entry, especially for those highly regulated pharmaceutical markets, like you mentioned earlier. The US, the EU, they need really robust safety and efficacy data from proper trials. It's just non-negotiable for getting approval.
yeah, that makes total sense. You can't just say it works. You have to show it works, and safely. What about safety itself? Aside from just needing more trials, are there actual concerns?
Yes, the research does raise some red flags there. Potential toxicity risks.
Okay.
Some studies point towards possible hepatotoxic effects, that means liver damage, and maybe neurotoxic effects, so nerve damage, usually at high doses or with long-term use.
Okay.
But those safety concerns, they're a significant hurdle. It makes it tough to get the green light for widespread use, even in things like dietary supplements, let alone mainstream medicines. It feeds right back into that validation challenge.
Yeah, if there are hints of toxicity, the regulators are going to demand even stronger proof it's safe under specific conditions. And I guess for anyone trying to make products with it, consistency must be crucial. For safety, for efficacy, for regulators.
Absolutely. And that's another big restraint highlighted in the sources, issues with quality and standardization.
How so?
Well, there can be pretty significant variations. Where the plant is grown, how it's harvested, the methods used to extract the matrine, how it's processed.
So it's not always the same stuff,
Essentially, yes. The end result is inconsistent product quality.
which causes problems for.
Well, for formulators trying to make a reliable product, it's a nightmare. And it also creates real challenges trying to meet international export rules or standards like GMP, good manufacturing practices. You need that consistency for global trade.
Okay, so it's this mix. Exciting potential, lots of demand pulling it forward, but then these pretty serious roadblocks. Validation, safety, consistency. Given that picture, what are the trends? Where's the market heading? What's the innovation focus?
Well, there's definitely a strong and growing focus on R&D. Research and development, particularly looking at things like novel delivery systems. Nanoformulations are mentioned quite a bit.
Nanoformulations, what's the idea there? Why use that for Matrine?
The thinking, based on the source material, seems to be about improving how the body actually absorbs and uses the compound. Bioavailability, basically.
Making it work better once it's in your system?
Kind of, yeah. They're trying to, encapsulate Matrine in these tiny nanoparticles. The goal is to boost its bioavailability, maybe make it more stable, potentially even deliver it more precisely in the body.
Interesting.
And these kinds of advanced delivery methods, they could open new doors for Matrine, maybe in more high-tech pharma applications, targeted therapies, could potentially help get around some of those earlier issues we talked about.
Sounds like a clever approach, trying to engineer solutions to the natural compound's limitations. What else is trending?
We're also seeing it being incorporated more into complex products, polyhobal formulas, functional foods, that kind of thing.
So not just Matrine on its own, but mixing it with other ingredients.
Exactly. You see brands creating things like herbal teas or capsules, wellness drinks, blending Matrine with other natural compounds.
And why do that?
Part of it is definitely consumer demand. People want natural, sort of holistic wellness products. But there's also the idea of synergy, maybe combining different bioactives gives you added benefits.
Right, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts.
Potentially, yeah.
And is it actually getting easier to find globally? Is trade picking up?
Definitely seems that way. The sources indicate global trade in Matrine-based products is, well, significantly on the rise.
Who's selling it mostly?
Countries with strong TCM backgrounds are leading the charge. China, Japan are mentioned specifically. Exporting Matrine-based stuff like nutraceuticals, but also those agrochemicals we discussed.
And who's buying? Where's the demand coming from?
A lot of the demand seems to be fueled by Western nations, actually.
Oh, interesting. Looking for
Botanical alternatives, mostly.
Yeah.
Things for immunity support, maybe, or natural ways to protect crops. It fits right into that bigger global shift towards plant-based innovation. Matrine's definitely finding a role in that cross-border trade in herbal products.
Okay. So if we try and kind of pull all this together, the big picture from this market research you shared, it sounds like Matrine is this, I don't know, really compelling example. An ancient substance getting a whole new look through modern science and these big global trends.
I think that sums it up pretty well. It really is this fascinating mix of, tradition and modern exploration. Huge potential, clearly, across different sectors, pharma, agriculture, nutraceuticals. It's riding that wave of demand for natural solutions. But as we've definitely covered, it's facing some very real, very significant hurdles. Getting through those modern regulatory hoops, ensuring consistent quality, those are major challenges still.
It feels like it almost perfectly captures the struggle and the opportunity of bringing traditional knowledge into the modern global marketplace.
It really does. Which I suppose leads to an interesting final thought, building on all this research, for you, our listener to maybe chew on.
Yeah.
Given this really complex profile, Matrine has, the centuries of traditional use, the promising lab results, but also those undeniable safety questions and the regulatory barriers.
Yeah.
What kind of future role do you actually see for a compound like Matrine? Where does it fit in global health and agriculture going forward?
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.